are individuals leaning towards more of the woke mentality. Now, you probably are well aware of who this individual is. He had recently come out and stated that, the military, is not getting woke, that there's nothing wrong with the anti-racist narrative, etc., that's been going on. Now, it's very important to understand what's going on. So, a lot of people point to this individual. He is the general. He's been appointed. He was appointed by Trump. Important to keep the timeline important of events that are moving forward. And so it says Trump appoints General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So now he has a very high ranking. Now it's important to understand that when in reference to what they refer to as the state deep, right? In reference to these individuals, and this is a reference to people who are appointed but cannot be fired, right? So it's not like an elected official where he can be removed from office because he's in a position where he was elected. These are individuals who basically are put into place, and they're there in essence to support those who get elected so that they never come out. And so he had recently stated that there was nothing wrong with the military doing these X, Y, and Z drills. And so an article from The Hedge talks about U.S. Air Force Base says drag queen show was essential for morale. It says the U.S. Air Force Base responded to controversy about a drag queen show hosted by the base, saying the performance was essential to morale, cohesion, and the readiness of the military. Now, you might be thinking this makes absolutely no sense. Some people who disagree with this lifestyle may say that this is sick, but it has nothing to do with the reason behind all this. Now, it goes on to say, it says Nellis Air Force Base staged its first ever drag queen show on June 6th, June 17th, called Drag You Nellis, which it said was important to teaching military personnel the significance of drag in the LGBT community. After some veterans raised concerns about why such an event was being hosted, Nellis hit back with a statement defending the show. This is so at Nellis is having a base sanctioned drag queen show. Isn't that awesome? Maybe some of the military journalists can call them up and ask them about this. And this was basically the flyer. And it says the event was sponsored by a private organization and provided an opportunity for attendees to learn about the history and the significance of drag performance art within the LGBT community. This has nothing to do with the LGBT community. It has nothing to do with drag. There's a much more insidious reason why they're doing this. This is ensuring our ranks reflect and are inclusive of the American people is essential to the morale and cohesion and the readiness of the military. Now, typically the military, which is primarily made up of men, you typically want masculine men who are willing to go to war and sacrifice themselves and kill people. So what does this have to do with LGBT awareness? It has absolutely nothing to do with it, but there is a purpose. And it goes on to say, ensuring our ranks reflect ensuring our ranks reflect and are inclusive of the American people is essential to the morale, the cohesion, and the readiness of the military. Nellis Air Force Base is committed to providing and championing an environment that is characterized by equal opportunity, diversity, and inclusion. It has nothing to do with that. Because the whole effort is the part of the Pentagon recruitment drive to appeal to the LGBT people, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin dismissing criticism of the program as talking points that foreign adversaries could capitalize on. He went on to claim that the U.S. military was not going soft and is instead focused on doing a great job of recruiting the right kind of people. This is the point. The reason being is because most U.S. veterans are right-leaning, are primarily Republicans, as this article goes on to state, and you're welcome to read many of these articles. says younger veterans are more likely to be Republicans than Democrats. It's contrary to popular belief, the U.S. military veterans haven't always been affiliated with the Republican Party. In fact, older veterans are more likely to be Democrats. But when you actually look at the history, it's not the case. Most of the people who have been willing to live and die for the country have been overwhelmingly Republican. Or at the very least, if they're not Republican, they're still more conservative in their thought process. Now, the Nazis back in the 30s focused very heavily on attacking America and African American soldiers. And so there was a lot of propaganda surrounding African Americans in the military. The reason being is because they were trying to dissuade them to fighting the Nazis. And instead, they kept referencing to them being slaves, you're a slave class, you're a secondary citizen, that the American military doesn't treat you with the type of respect that we, the Nazis, would treat you. And so this is from the U.S. Holocaust Museum. This is how Nazi Germany weaponized the race card against the U.S. Army. And this is an article that came out in 2017. This propaganda efforts sought to exploit racial tensions. It says there have never been lynchings of colored men in Germany. It says they have always been treated decently, said the Nazi leaflet. This is dropped on an African American soldiers fighting across Europe. So you don't have to be afraid with the Germans. Uncle Sam's colored soldiers are just cannon fodder, another proclaimed. Still, another promised good food and fellowship if African American troops would just surrender. It says there's no need to go on a diet. Plenty of food, nourishing, well-cooked, and wholesome for all prisoners of war. And these are the leaflets, right? These are the leaflets that they utilized primarily to target Black American soldiers. It says the Nazis were virulent racists who viewed history as a biology-driven struggle for survival and dominance between various peoples. They identified Black people as an inferior, alien race and threatened the future existence of Western society. But that didn't stop them from trying to exploit racial tensions among U.S. forces to encourage desertion in the closing days of World War II. Just creating wedges between people had been a Nazi strategy since the party's inception. Now, the purpose behind what is going on, I'm not showing it here, the picture here, right? The whole purpose of this, it's a separating, right? Just like Jesus has spoken about that the shepherd sits and he separates the sheep from the goats, right? And this is the point. This is the point of what is going on. Why you see all of this, vaccine versus no vaccine, mask versus no mask, etc., right? Wokeness within the military, that you would think this has absolutely no place for this. But it's basically a weeding. They're basically weeding out the military, individuals within the military, so that they can then replace those people within the military, right? Like there was recently, I think it was that guy from the Navy who had spoken out about this very thing, and he was immediately removed from his position. Just recently, the head of the U.S. border was told by Joe Biden to either you are going to leave your position, you're going to retire, or I will fire you. Those were the three options that he was given. He is the head of the border administration down south. And the reason for this is because before you make your move, you have to know that your people are in positions of authority. And this is the purpose of what they're doing. Just like Jesus had talked about, separating the wheat from the chaff, this is basically what the U.S. government is doing. They're separating those who are with us from those who could potentially be against us. And that's why just recently there was an article in the Blaze that talked about how the U.S. government was no longer going to be giving Christian nonprofit organizations tax exemption. The reason being was because they said that the teachings that are typically taught within the organizations are typically more right wing. They're typically more Republican in their nature. And so they said that they would be removing them and that they would not be accepting their tax bracket. Now, again, I'm not for this very thing, but it just goes to show you that from their standpoint, they're saying you claim to be a Christian religious organization, but from our viewpoint, you are far too political for our liking. And so they threw them in the same camp. Now, of course, what Republicans really don't understand is that once the left has enough power, they will kill the Republican Party. And this is what has happened in history. And you're just witnessing it again. That's why you see so much effort on pushing people apart. Brown people versus white people. White supremacy is our number one issue within the country, Joe Biden had said. And it's primarily because this is the Nazi strategy that they have used in times past. And it is the exact same strategy that the Democrats are utilizing today. And so many of these old individuals who were once part of a Democratic Party are actually now part of the Nazi regime that it now exists within America. And it is playing out just like it has had in the history books that we learned long ago. That's why they do so much work to attack history by tearing down statues. The Nazis did the same thing through the inception of indoctrination from their youth on. The Nazis did very similarly with indoctrinating children, and they're turning children against their parents, which is why just recently, what was it that I talked about it in another video, where Joe Biden said that they're basically expanding the Patriot Act to include where individuals within their home could rat out their own family members if they were viewed as right-wing fanatics. And these are all the tactics that the Nazis used to gain power. And it was in this sort of an environment where the Holocaust and deaths and a lot of scientific experiments had taken place, which is why you see what is going on today. And it's important to pay very close attention because a lot of this will play out just as it has played out in the past. And as they often say, that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it.